So, hi, my name's Adam. I live in Brighton in the UK, but I'm originally from a town called Manchester that you might know from the Smiths or Oasis. And I work in media and I work with soccer players and celebrities, which comes onto the theme of this a little bit later on. And I live in a boarding school with my partner, who I'm about to get married to very soon. And I suppose, I felt I saw your request for people to get in touch and talk about things, and it really resonated with me after kind of checking out the podcast and hearing what people talk about, and that, like you said, that kind of shared experience. So I've lost 3 people in 2 months. So I lost my uncle a couple of months ago to cancer. My partner lost her godfather, who might sound a little bit removed, but is probably the closest thing that I will ever know to a father-in-law. And I lost my granddad, who we actually buried 2 days ago. And I think it's a time of reflection, right? Like, you lose a lot of people, and a lot of people who have been very solid in your life. I've known my uncle and my granddad for 32 years, and I've known my godfather for 8 years now. And I think there's some really important things that come along when you lose people, and what it means to lose people, and how you feel about that. And I think I wanted to get in touch just to kind of go over that and talk about my experience and where I've come from, basically. So I suppose the first question that you asked in the email was, like, where did my sort of mental health journey start? So I've spent a long time kind of thinking about that, because I think there's not a moment for me, or like a point of change, I suppose. But there's points that I look back on where there may have been a slight change or things change. So I suppose the best way of saying it is, when I was younger, I used to run at a relatively high level. So I sprinted, sprinted at a high level to the point that I was convinced I was going to have a career, go to the Olympics and kind of work in sport as an athlete. And then when I was 15, I got quite a bad injury. And now it wasn't like a career-ending injury or anything, but it was an injury that kind of took me out of that main goal point where, it kind of, you start getting selected and start going through the process of being part of like a national team, for instance. Now, you think 15, 16 is a relatively difficult time anyway. And I think what I found was, I didn't know it at the time, but the loss of the ability to go into that world of being an athlete really affected me. And I developed all these coping mechanisms and developed all these kind of ways that I ignored what was happening outside me without realizing. And I think I floated through life. So, I mean, I'd not necessarily not dealt with issues before. My parents had been through a divorce, and I was quite front and center in that. So it's not that I dealt with adversity in any big way, or not dealt with adversity in any big way. I think I definitely felt pain in my life, but I'd never felt personal loss and personal adversity in a way that really affected me and my day to day. So for the next few years, floated through life and went through the kind of the usual life of a sort of teenager in the UK, which is you finish school and you do your GCSEs, which are your kind of exams, and go to sixth form, go to uni. I did a sport degree out of, I suppose, nothing else, and somehow managed to get my degree.
Nothing like that,
yeah, right. And then I hit that end point when I finished uni, and I was like, what am I doing now? Like, what is happening? And I suppose then, as in that part of the world, like this is like 2011, we're in a recession as a world, and everything seems quite bad. Anyway, so I go away with my friends for my 21st birthday and meet someone while I'm at a festival in Spain. So she's 10 years older than me and lives in London, or well, near London, and we get along right away. And she, essentially, as we kind of continue to meet up after this festival, gives me this out. You can leave Manchester and you can come down to London and you can start a new life. Now, the preface to this is, at the time, my family members, especially my mum, were saying to me, she's not filling me with confidence. I'm concerned about her, how she's acting and how she's being with you. And what happened for the next 2 years after I moved to London was that I was in an abusive relationship, both physical and mental. Now, I suppose what's important to think about with regards to grief is at this point, I'm still floating through life, very unsure of what to do. And she's 10 years older than me, and she's trying to guide me through everything. And I moved down to London, and things start getting very bad very quickly. At this point, I'm working in advertising for a newspaper. So it's a national newspaper. It's quite renowned. And she's working in fashion. And we've got these both quite interesting jobs. And I come back to Manchester to see my family, and everyone feels very almost proud of what I'm doing. Like a lot of people I know have kind of still going to uni or doing things. And I've gone to the big city and made this thing myself. And she, behind the scenes, things are very bad. There's a lot of physical abuse, a lot of gaslighting going on, a lot of, physical punching going on. I'm kind of having to conceal black eyes and bruises and things like that. And I lived with that for a year before I decided I need to do anything. And I think what's really important here is those same coping mechanisms that got me through those years where I didn't know what I was doing are coming into play here. Yeah. I'm coming into this point where I really don't know what I'm doing, but I'm just ignoring it, and other things are coming into play. So a year goes by before I seek help. So I get to a point where I know that I need to leave, but I don't know what to do. So I contact the NHS. Oh, right. Yeah, I contact the NHS, and they say, you need to get in touch with some shelters, basically. So I ring a load of shelters, and all of them tell me that they are for females only, that males cannot be part of these shelters. And that I was kind of waiting for that, that part of it. Like as you're sitting there talking, I was like, there's going to be that version, because that you don't hear people talk about it for sure, but people also don't, on the other end, don't believe that happens. Most definitely. And to the point that one shelter actually kind of asked if I wanted help to stop abusing the person who I was with. To kind of preface this, I'm 21, 22, in London, a city that I don't know particularly well, surrounded by my partner's friends and family, and struggling. And at this point, she's gaslighting me, and I'm not really sure where I stand, and I'm blocking everything out. So we hit this point where we end up moving back in with her parents, and I contact the NHS, and I'm like, look, I can't get any help. I think I'm a coercive and controlling human being. I think I need some sort of therapy, something to help me stop being like this to my partner. To which they go, amazing, cool, let's get you in. Yeah. And they prescribed me a round of cognitive behavioural therapy. So in the UK and the NHS, the way that it tends to work is if you go in for mental health issues, you don't necessarily just get given sort of antidepressants or anything like that. You have like a pathway, and they almost always try and treat it with some form of talking therapy if there's no real danger or risk. Now, this is one of those points where things change, I think, where I'm talking about that moment of change. And I started to see a therapist who, when I walked in, I was like, I've got these issues. I'm with this person. She says I'm controlling her. I think I might be. She says I'm an awful human being. I think I might be. And kind of go through all the kind of lies and things that I've been told for the last year, 18 months. I start parroting back to this therapist. And she says to me, stop. Just stop right there. That's not anything that we need to do. I want you to talk about you and forget her. And anyway, so we have 6 sessions. During those 6 sessions, she essentially makes me realize that I'm not doing anything. And I might not be perfect, and I might have made mistakes, but I'm not abusive, and I'm not controlling, and I'm not coercive. And the kind of main takeaway for me there is that she exposed me to the coping mechanisms that I was using. And she exposed me to the ways in which I was dumbing down the pain and going through the motions of trying to stop myself experiencing what was happening. And that's that came through in many, many different ways. But that for me was a real eureka moment, because once you recognize the patterns and you recognize what's happening, well, things become really clear then. So leave that relationship and move back to Manchester. And kind of float through the next few years, just knowing that things aren't quite right mentally, but things are kind of going on. Meet my partner who I'm about to get married to. And she, I always call her my Renaissance period, because she's, like everyone in the world, got her own kind of, I wouldn't say struggles with mental health, but has mental health times where things are better, things are worse. But when you kind of be completely true to someone, I think you can be completely true to yourself. And you see reflections of what's happening. Absolutely. And I see the moments of my vulnerability and her vulnerability, and the way in which we talk to each other. So we've been together 8 years now. For the last 8 years, there's been adversities and there's been times it's been very difficult, but I've grown much stronger, much better, developed ways in which to kind of understand why things are happening, work through those things. So without going into too much detail about the ups and downs of the last 8 years through work life and personal lives and home lives and so on and so forth, in the last 2 months, I've lost my grandfather, my fiance lost her godfather, and I lost my uncle. And we buried my grandfather 2 days ago. Now, I think what's been really interesting about the last few months is when we lost my uncle, he'd been ill for a long time. He'd had cancer, recovered, and then got cancer again. And although it felt quite quick, he'd been unwell for a long time. And I really noticed that throughout that, I felt very distant from him and distant from the fact that he died. But underneath, I felt very sad about it and really struggled to come to terms with what had happened and why he'd been so unwell and how he'd managed to survive for as long as he had, and then ultimately where it went downhill. And I really threw myself at my mum, who was struggling. She just lost a brother. And I really threw myself at trying to help her and talk to her. So went straight up north and did all the things that I need to do. But I think what I noticed was these coping mechanisms that I felt like I haven't dealt with for a number of years were coming back in. I was trying to get everything sort of dumbed down to a real logical sense. I wasn't necessarily allowing myself to feel things. I was deflecting feelings. I was trying to rush the grieving process and rush everything that had happened to allow me to get on with my day. I work in a startup. It's a hard day to day a lot of the time. You're making a lot of difficult decisions where you have to be on point a lot of the time. And I think, those same mechanisms of coping came in that are not healthy, I don't think. Not long after then,
you don't quote unquote, have time to grieve.
No, exactly. And that is a big part, I think, because we live 5 hours travel away from where my mum lives. And I shot straight up, was there in a very intense situation, obviously, where your family are all grieving. And it's not just your mum and you, I'm the oldest of 5 children, and some of those, my sister's 12 years old, she's a young kid. You don't just necessarily grieve on your own, you grieve in a situation, I think, and you take on that kind of big brother element as well. We kind of went through the burial and went through everything, and that was very hard. But again, coping mechanisms kicking in. I was trying to push everything a bit away, stay a bit isolated, cut off. And then my partner found out that her godfather was ill just weeks later, and that he'd been living with an illness for quite a while. And she noticed that she found out that he was in a sort of terminal state. So went to see him. Now, I think this is again where, not a eureka moment because that sounds positive, but you have a moment of clarity, I suppose. And one of the points that really comes in with me and I really recognize is that in the same way over the last however many years, 8 years, we've been together and I've seen my vulnerabilities and I've seen my issues come through. When my soon-to-be wife's godfather died, I saw her grief and I felt all my grief in her. And that was a really important part of what it means to experience something yourself for me. I think, when Brian died, it was a very difficult time, and he was someone who was very close to her and had been a huge mainstay throughout her life, and she was in a very, very upset way. And I think as much as I saw the grief and I saw the pain, I also saw the busyness get in the way and the almost coping mechanisms that stopped her from feeling it properly. And that was a real kind of, a moment of clarity for me where I didn't know that I'd been repressing things, and I didn't realize I'd been repressing things. So within days, basically, we lost my granddad, and he, again, he was 91 when he died. So it's not like he died suddenly. He wasn't necessarily unexpected, although it was not necessarily something that we thought was going to happen.
Right.
And talking about that flip, we feel that, again, I noticed myself, those mechanisms coming in, coping, doing all these different things. And I felt with that new perspective of almost feeling it and almost having my partner kind of really, I can see her in front of me and I can see how sad it is. These mechanisms coming in, I think I was able to face it much more really. Now, that was a really interesting moment. I think when we lost Grandad, my mum really struggled, and by necessity, this is in between Christmas and New Year, we went up north again to Manchester, and that kind of big brother, oldest son kicks in. So you're trying to look after everyone, you're trying to quite literally hold everyone together and hold them through. And I really noticed the physical nature in which that I'd shut things off and I shut things down mentally and in kind of a way that stops me feeling things. But with Grandad, I think because I'd seen Abigail be in a quite vulnerable state and upset as well, I think it helped me overcome those issues much more quickly and in a healthy way. So like I say, we only buried Grandad 2 days ago. And what's really interesting right now is that as soon as we got home after the funeral, I began to feel everything really intensely. So I feel very sad. I feel very strongly. And I think at the moment, I feel quite grateful for the feelings because I feel relieved that they've come in and I feel relieved that they're happening. And I know that I'm on the journey now. I've not got a stunt or anything in front of the journey that's making me, that's not allowing me to feel anymore. So I think that's a really important point. But it also reminds me of a book, and I've just completely blanked on the name of the book, but I read a book a little while ago where, which is about antidepressants and people taking antidepressants in the world and the kind of overprescription of antidepressants. So there's a statistic, and please don't quote me on the validity and the kind of pure accuracy of this statistic, but of all the people in the world who take antidepressants, only about 4% have a true version of clinical depression, as in their actual physiological makeup causes them depression, as opposed to the sort of the predicted rest of the population who are on antidepressants or going through an antidepressant treatment. They are dealing with some sort of trauma or some sort of issue. And that book was a real turning point for me because I'd been dealing with those kind of feelings of depression for a long time. And I think it's about that dealing with the pain. And I really felt seeing my partner was almost like understanding that I wasn't physiologically depressed about losing all these people. I'm feeling very sad because I've gone through an immense amount of loss in the last 2 months, both from a personal perspective, but also a family perspective, and also kind of in our home right now, that perspective as well. And what I was hoping to do was to be able to speak to people and try and allow them to understand there's a real value in understanding why you're sad. And there's a real value in understanding what it is that's making you sad and what you're doing because you're sad. Now, you may have clinical depression and you may have a physiological makeup that makes you depressed, and that needs treatment. And you may be at a point where you need to seek treatment because you are in such a state of sadness that something needs to be done about that. But I think for me, what's been really helpful is the almost disconnect that's allowed me to work through the way in which I can take those coping mechanisms, and as bad as they are, they also allow me to see things in quite an isolated metric and really understand and separate out what it is that's making me sad. So when we talk about this loss that I'm going through at the moment and the grief, I think what I feel is the sadness of loss, the sad that I'm not going to be able to talk to my family members anymore and experience days with them like I used to. But I also know that what I feel right now and how I feel right now is because I've lost them, not because anything's wrong with me, not because I have a propensity to be more sad than anyone else, but I know I'm sad because of those things. And I feel really strongly that we all in the world, like everyone, doesn't matter if you're in New York or London or LA, wherever it may be, we all have adversities, and I think it's all really important. It's very important for all of us to take those adversities with knowledge and understand that what we deal with, how we deal with, can have many effects, and that doesn't make us anything else other than real human beings, and that we have to learn how to deal with those things ourselves. That may be using pharmaceuticals, that may be meditating, that may be listening to music, but I think everyone has to learn how they deal with it. For me, it's quite literally taken me 15 years to really get to grips with taking that sadness and taking those feelings of pain and inadequacy and all anxiety, all the things that come with you, and allowing them to be, and understanding that they're not wrong and they're not they're supposed to be here. They're supposed to be with us, because in some ways they're a natural process. We're human beings, right? It's a human process to go through grief and to go through pain. I think that's everything from that for the moment.
Yeah. No, and I mean that's a perfect point to make too. And you said something like before you even began all that like you when you got home 2 days ago, that that you didn't feel like it was there, and then it was. And I think a lot of people, when they either don't realize they're in the grieving process until it's like they've gotten to the the resentment phase, or they've gotten upset at something they didn't mean to get upset, and then it's like but you said something that was really nice, that you got home and you felt it all, and you're like, okay, I'm on this journey. It's almost like you packed a bag and got in the car, and you're like, okay, I'm going on the road trip now. I'm not sure where it's going to take me, but you were grateful to be in the car, you know, and
most definitely.
I think that's important to highlight, that you're right. I mean, we have to address the fact that, this is on that process, and it's going to be a long process.
It
I
is.
think you said something about the fact that, this is not, it's not going to go away quick.
No, no, most definitely.
So real quick,
sorry, no, please go on.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say about coming home and about being in the kind of home environment. I think there's also quite a physical element to the trauma. Like my granddad lived in and around Manchester his entire life, basically. And that closeness to the grief and the closeness to where he died and the closeness to the family, I think, was an important thing. And there's something really safe about being at home. Like we're hundreds of miles away here from what is my traditional kind of family home. I think that journey is really interesting, because I think the scenario of which you are in alters the way in which you can feel things. Like we all have roles that we play, I think. Like at work, I'm in a relatively leadership role, so I have to show leadership. At home, we are equals. So me and my partner have a very equal relationship, very shared experiences. When I go out into kind of the world, I'm whoever I may be to those people out there. But I think the way in which I act, respond, and deal with issues is very different. And one thing I do know is that when I am at home up north in Manchester, I default to taking on the burden as much as I can for other people. Which again, I think is an important point to understand, that you can sometimes things as simple as walking out of a door, being in a different location, being in nature at times, can really alter the way in which your mind works and thinks, and perspectives get formed. I know for me, some of the best mental health tricks, things I've ever done, have been walking, just literally walking. It doesn't matter if it's in a beautiful location or it's down the street where we live. It's the act of movement for me is an exceptional kind of driver of mental process. And I feel that that's, again, coming home, different location, having quite literally driven away from the pain, is like a huge distance in both mental clarity and physical distance.
Yeah.
So.